Hello, this is Lauren of Wearing History, and I have a sewing tutorial for how to sew top-stitched pleats. This is the Montana pattern, but you can use it on any type of skirt pattern. So I've marked a B for my backs on the wrong side of the fabric to keep my front and my backs distinct, and I'm going to match my right sides together and pin them along the side seam, matching my notches and the top and the bottom of the piece. These have already been thread marked. You can watch a video on thread marking on my channel. I just put it up prior to this one. So pin this in place using the two together and then stitch it with your seam allowance. My seam allowance on this pattern is 1/2 inch. You definitely want to check your pattern to see what your seam allowance is. The benefit of doing the thread marking is you can see on both the right and wrong side of the fabric where the mark is. But for this particular skirt, we're going to match our pleats on the right side. So you don't really even need to see them on the wrong side of the fabric, but make sure that you mark them in a method that will come out in the wash. So test it. If you don't use thread marking, test your marking like your chalk or your pen. Now take it to the machine and stitch it. After it's stitched, it looks like this. I've also serged it to finish my edges. That's the center front, and you can see where the stitches end is the cross mark up there. I'm noticing that the stitching goes towards center front, so that means that I'm going to pleat it with the excess going towards center front, or center back in this case. Be very careful when you do this. You want to make sure that you pay attention to your grain line. Make sure that the grain is going straight up and down and straight side to side, and smooth it as best you can. You don't want any kind of bubbles or any kind of rippling. If you try to fight the pleats, they will never lay the way you want them to when your skirt is finished and your basting is taken out. Now for this pattern, we are basting it. You don't have to baste it, but I find the finish is much more professional, and pressing is really easy when you have it basted in place. So essentially, we are basting the pleats in place. You can see I'm bridging the gap between center back and side back here because that is where the second pleat is on this particular pattern. But we are basting the pleats into place, and then I'm going to press them. And then we're going to stitch the top stitching down to the mark. Take your pins out and wiggle it around as much as you need to make sure that everything is laying nice and flat. And you definitely want your pleats going in the same direction for each half of the skirt, which means that both sides have the excess going towards center front or center back. You're going to get your thread and your needle, and you are now going to baste it in place. I find a contrast to be useful for an easy reference of where it is so I can take it out quickly. Like I said, watch my previous video on thread marking if you want a video tutorial on basting or thread marking. I am going through all layers here so that they will all be together and I won't have any need of pins. You can use big stitches. Just make sure you do it on both sides and take it to the sewing machine. Oh, I'm sorry. Take it to the pressing board and press it. Now take it to the sewing machine. I'm stitching it at 1/8 inch from the fold, and you need to back stitch at the top and especially at the bottom to make sure that your stitching won't come undone. There, what does it look like? So after you press it again, that's what it looks like. The front and the back. You can take the basting out after you touch the waistband. Thank you very much. You can get my patterns at wearinghistory.clothing or Wearing History on Etsy for e-patterns.